After the tragic loss of their daughter, a wealthy couple lives trapped in grief and guilt, until a strange girl appears wearing the exclusive necklace of the deceased child. That mysterious encounter reveals hidden truths and awakens an unexpected path to redemption. Friday night in New York City was especially congested. The traffic on Park Avenue crawled along as always, but inside the black Land Rover, none of that mattered. Gregory Mason, one of the country's most influential entrepreneurs, owner of Mason Construction, drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding his cell phone. Beside him, Marianne, his wife, a renowned architect with projects on 3 continents, gazed out the window with the tired expression of someone who had worked too hard all week. In the back seat, little Sophia, just 8 years old, was drawing in her pink notebook. She hummed a little song she had learned at school, swinging her little legs that barely reached the car floor. Her brown curls danced with every movement of her head, and the necklace gleaming on her neck reflected the lights of the street lamps passing by the window. It was an exclusive necklace, custom-made by an Italian jeweler, a symbol of that family's unbreakable bond. 3 unique pieces in the entire world, one for the father, one for the mother, and one for the daughter. A white gold chain with an intertwined heart-shaped pendant engraved with each of their initials. It was the gift Gregory had commissioned for their wedding anniversary 5 years ago, when Sophia was only 3 and looked at them with those bright little eyes, asking for one too. Gregory accelerated as soon as the light turned green. He was in a hurry. He was always in a hurry. An early meeting on Saturday, a lunch with investors, a visit to a construction site in Greenwich. Marianne sighed, but said nothing. She'd already given up on asking him to slow down. She had given up on a lot of things, actually. In recent years, their routine had become an automatic gear. He was immersed in business. She was lost in international projects, and Sophia was there, in the middle, growing up too fast, asking for attention with gestures that often went unnoticed. Sophia held up her drawing. It was a portrait of the family, the 3 of them holding hands under a giant yellow sun. "Mommy, look what I made," she said, holding the paper forward. Marianne turned her head, but she was looking at her phone. "That's beautiful, sweetie. Put it away and Mommy will look at it properly later, okay?" Sophia slowly lowered the paper, biting her lip. She put the drawing inside her backpack, along with others no one had seen yet. Then she took a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket, on which she had written something in a shaky, crooked hand. She looked at those words, took a deep breath and folded the paper again, stuffing it into her jacket pocket. It wasn't time. It was never time. The car sped along the FDR drive. Gregory honked at a driver who had cut him off, swore under his breath and accelerated even more. Marianne closed her eyes, tired. Sophia looked out the window, watching the city lights blur into colorful streaks. She held the necklace around her neck, squeezing it tightly, as if asking for protection. Something inside her told her that tonight would be different, something she couldn't explain, but she felt it in her chest like a tightness. Then it happened. A runaway truck swerved into their lane. Gregory tried to swerve, but there was no time. The impact was brutal. The sound of twisting metal, of shattering glass, of screams that mixed with the deafening roar of the collision. It all happened in seconds, but it seemed to last an eternity. The car flipped twice, slid across the pavement and came to a stop on its side, completely destroyed, its body crumpled and glass scattered everywhere. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Gregory woke up in the hospital 3 days later. The first thing he saw was the white ceiling, the cold lights, the smell of disinfectant. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't obey. He felt a strange weight in his legs, or rather, he felt the absence of any sensation. He turned his head with difficulty and saw Marianne sitting by the bed, her face swollen from crying, her eyes red, her expression completely empty. Gregory tried to speak, but his throat was dry. Marianne realized he was awake and jumped up, gripping his hand tightly, as if clinging to the last piece of a shipwreck. "Gregory," she whispered, her voice choked. He tried to ask about Sophia. He tried, but he couldn't. Something in Marianne's eyes already said it all. She shook her head slowly, tears streaming silently down her face, and she didn't need to say another word. Gregory felt his chest tighten, felt the air leave his lungs, felt his world crumble. He screamed. He screamed with all the strength he had, but the sound that came out was just a hoarse, desperate groan that was lost within the cold walls of that hospital room. Sophia hadn't survived the impact. The little girl who hummed in the back seat, who drew her family under a yellow sun, who held her necklace tightly, was gone. And with her, she had taken all the light from that home. The days that followed were a blur of pain. Gregory underwent surgeries, tests, endless sessions with doctors who explained in that professional, distant tone that he had suffered a spinal cord injury. His legs no longer responded. They might never respond again. He would need a wheelchair. He would need physical therapy. He would need to learn to live in a completely different way. But none of that mattered. Nothing mattered without Sophia. Marianne also emerged from the accident with minor injuries, cuts, bruises, nothing that time wouldn't heal. But inside she was completely shattered. Guilt gnawed at her every second. If only she had insisted they go slower. If only she had asked him to take another route. If only she had looked at Sophia that last time the girl showed her the drawing. If. Her mind was a prison of regrets, and there was no key to open that door. The funeral was torture. Hundreds of people attended, many whom Gregory and Marianne barely knew. Businessmen, politicians, clients, suppliers. Everyone with that rehearsed look of sorrow, those empty words of comfort that comforted nothing. Gregory was in his wheelchair, his face grim, his eyes lost somewhere in the distance. Marianne was beside him, clutching a soaked handkerchief, unable to stop crying. When they lowered the small white coffin into the ground, Marianne collapsed. She fell to her knees, sobbing so deeply, so devastatingly, that several people had to hold her. Gregory just watched, motionless, his fists clenched on the arms of his chair, feeling a rage so intense at himself that it felt like he would explode. They returned home that afternoon. The 10,000-square-foot mansion on the Upper East Side had never seemed so large, so empty, so cold. Every room echoed with Sophia's absence. Her room, untouched, with the stuffed animals arranged on the bed, the books on the shelf, the drawings taped to the wall. The playroom with games scattered about, the rocking horse, the dollhouse Gregory had custom-made. The kitchen, where Sophia loved to help make brownies, always making a mess and laughing in that delightful way that could melt anyone's heart. Now, there was only silence. Gregory began to live locked in his office. He tried to work, to focus on contracts, on spreadsheets, on video conference meetings, but it all seemed meaningless. The company he had built with so much effort, the empire that had taken decades to erect, suddenly seemed like a cruel joke. What was the point of having so much money, so much power, so much influence, if he couldn't protect the one thing that truly mattered? Marianne locked herself in a different kind of prison. She stopped answering the phone, stopped replying to emails, stopped leaving the house. She spent hours sitting in Sophia's room, holding the little girl's clothes, smelling the scent that still clung to the fabric. She talked to herself, asked for forgiveness, cried until she had no tears left. Some nights Gregory could hear her sobs from the other side of the house, but he didn't know what to do. He was drowning himself. He had no strength to save anyone. The household staff tiptoed around, speaking in whispers, avoiding making noise. The cook prepared meals that no one ate. The housekeeper cleaned rooms that no one used. The driver waited in the garage for calls that never came. Life had stopped in that mansion, and no one knew how to make it start again. Gregory started having nightmares. Every night he relived the accident. He heard the sound of the collision, felt the impact, saw Sophia in the back seat, scared, calling for him. He would wake up sweating, screaming, and lie awake for hours, staring at the dark ceiling, feeling the unbearable weight of guilt crushing his chest. Why was he driving so fast? Why hadn't he been paying attention? Why hadn't he stopped to look at the drawing Sophia had shown him? Why? Marianne had her own demons. She remembered all the times she had told Sophia to wait, all the promises she had made and not kept, all the half-finished hugs because she was in a hurry, busy, tired. She remembered the last time Sophia had asked her to read a story before bed, and she had said she couldn't, that she had work to finish, that she would read it the next day. Except the next day never came. The weeks dragged on. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. The calendar moved forward, but time inside that house was frozen. Gregory could barely look at Marianne. It wasn't anger, it was pain. It was the reflection of everything they had lost, of everything they could never get back. They barely spoke, barely looked at each other. They lived like ghosts, inhabiting the same house, but completely distant from one another. The company began to feel Gregory's absence. Decisions stalled, projects were delayed, clients complained. The CFO, Richard Albright, an ambitious man in his early 40s, began to take on more responsibilities. He had always been Gregory's right-hand man, the one who knew all the numbers, all the contracts, all the negotiations. Now, with his boss away, lost in grief, Richard saw an opportunity. He started making decisions on his own, signing contracts without consulting anyone, moving funds in a way no one was paying attention to. He was smart. He knew no one was looking, and when no one is looking, a lot can happen in the shadows. Marianne had also given up on her work. Her international projects were abandoned, clients left, her office closed its doors. She didn't care. Architecture, design, awards, recognition, none of it made sense without Sophia. She had spent years building a brilliant career, and now it was all crumbling, and she didn't even have the strength to try to hold the pieces together. On a Sunday morning, 3 months after the accident, Marianne woke up with an urgent need to go to the cemetery. She hadn't been since the funeral, she hadn't had the courage. But that day, something inside her told her she had to go. She dressed slowly, her hands trembling, and went to Gregory's office. He was sitting in his wheelchair, looking out the window, his gaze lost. Marianne knocked softly on the door, and he turned his head. "I'm going to the cemetery," she said, her voice weak. "Do you want to come with me?" Gregory was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Yes, I do." It was the first time in 3 months they had done something together. The driver took them in silence to Woodlawn Cemetery, one of the oldest and most imposing, in New York. The day was overcast with that heavy air that seemed to promise rain. Gregory was pushed up the ramp to the family mausoleum, and Marianne walked beside him, her arms crossed, shivering, even though it wasn't cold. When they reached Sophia's grave, they both stood there motionless, not knowing what to say. The white marble headstone had her name engraved on it, with a smiling photo, the kind they take at school with a blue background. Sophia was smiling in that photo, her front teeth slightly gapped, her curls messy, her eyes shining with life. It was impossible to look at that image and not feel your heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. Marianne knelt on the grass, touched the headstone with her hands, and began to cry. Gregory remained in his chair, looking at the sky, feeling tears run down his face, but making no sound. The silence there was deep, heavy, suffocating, and it was in that moment, in that devastating silence, that something happened. A little girl appeared, walking among the graves. She was small, thin, with old patched clothes and worn-out sandals that seemed too big for her feet. On her back, she carried a mesh bag full of crushed cans, the kind collectors gather from the streets to sell later. Her hair was tied in a frayed ponytail, and her face had the weary expression of someone who grew up too fast, who knew the harshness of life before even turning 10. But what made Marianne freeze, what made the air leave her lungs, was the necklace. Around that little girl's neck, shining in the faint afternoon light, was the necklace, the exclusive necklace, the one Sophia was wearing on the day of the accident, the intertwined heart, the white gold, the engraved initials. There were only 3 in the entire world, and that necklace was there around the neck of a complete stranger. Marianne jumped up, stumbling, nearly falling. Gregory saw her movement and frowned, not understanding. Then he saw it too, and felt his heart race. The girl noticed she was being watched and stopped, frightened. She took a step back, clutching the straps of her bag of cans, her eyes wide. Marianne ran. She crossed the stone path, moved between the graves and stopped in front of the girl, breathless, her face wet with tears. "Where did you get that necklace?" Marianne asked, her voice desperate, almost a shout. The girl looked at her, scared, instinctively bringing a hand to her neck. I found it," she answered, her voice thin and trembling. "Found it where?" Marianne insisted, moving closer. The girl took another step back, afraid. "On the ground, about 3 months ago. There was a commotion on the street, lots of cars, sirens, and I saw an envelope on the ground. It was wet. Inside was this necklace and a letter." Marianne felt her legs weaken. Gregory had approached in his wheelchair, pushing with his hands, and was now beside her, also looking at the girl, also seeing the necklace they knew so well. "A letter?" Gregory asked, his voice hoarse. "What letter?" The girl looked at them both, still scared, but there was something sincere in her eyes, something that made it seem like she was telling the truth. "It was a letter written by a child. It seemed important, so I kept it. It's at my house." Marianne couldn't hold back any longer. She knelt in front of the girl, gently held her shoulders, and looked deep into her eyes. "Please take me to your house, please. I need to see that letter, please." The girl was silent, looking at the woman crying in front of her, at the man in the wheelchair whose face was contorted with pain, and something inside her understood that this was important, that this was bigger than she had imagined. She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll take you." And there, in that cemetery, under a sky heavy with grey clouds, 3 lives that should never have crossed were about to intertwine in a way none of them could have predicted. The past was coming back, and with it, truths that no one was ready to hear. If this story has intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, continuing. The girl led them through the neighborhood streets, carrying the bag of cans on her back as if it were the weight of the world. Gregory followed in his wheelchair, pushed by the driver, and Marianne walked beside him, her heart pounding, her hands trembling, her mind spinning in 1,000 directions at once. They crossed the affluent area of the cemetery, passed the busy avenue, and gradually entered a part of the city that seemed to belong to another universe. The streets grew narrower, the asphalt gave way to cracked pavement, and the mansions were replaced by tenement buildings and makeshift structures, stacked one on top of the other, forming a maze of tight, dark alleys. This was the South Bronx, one of New York's most underserved areas, where life happened in a completely different way. Children ran barefoot in the street, women washed clothes in basins on their doorsteps, men played dominoes on crates, and the sound of loud hip-hop echoed from some makeshift speaker. The smell of food, mixed with open sewage, filled the air, and the heat seemed even more suffocating there, where concrete and tin reflected the sun without mercy. Marianne looked around, shocked. She had lived her entire life inside a bubble of privilege. She knew places like this existed, of course, but she had never been in one. She had never felt firsthand what it meant to live there. And now, walking through those narrow alleys, she felt a strange mix of shame, discomfort, and something she couldn't name. Maybe it was empathy, or maybe it was just the pain of realizing how unfair the world was. The girl stopped in front of a small makeshift dwelling, built from old boards and covered with a piece of blue tarp. There was no real door, just a torn cloth curtain that swayed in the wind. She pulled the curtain aside and went in, signaling for them to wait. Gregory looked at Marianne, and they exchanged a look heavy with expectation and fear. What were they about to discover? Seconds later, the girl returned, holding a yellowed, crumpled envelope with stains of moisture and dirt. She handed it to Marianne carefully, as if delivering something sacred. Her mother appeared behind her, a thin woman in her early 30s, her face marked by exhaustion and the hardships of life. She looked at Gregory and Marianne with suspicion, but said nothing. Marianne took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it slowly, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a page from a notebook with shaky, childish handwriting in colored pencil. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Sophia's. The tears began to fall before she could even read. Gregory moved closer in his chair, craning his neck to see. Marianne took a deep breath and began to read aloud, her voice choked, breaking with every word. "If I disappear one day, will anyone notice? I try to talk, but it feels like no one listens. I show my drawings, but no one looks. I ask for a hug, but everyone is busy. Sometimes I wonder if I'm invisible. I wish Daddy would stop working so much. I wish Mommy would spend more time with me. I just wish we were a real family, not just a pretend one. I love you. But do you even know?" The silence that followed was devastating. Marianne let out a loud, desperate sob and dropped the paper. She covered her face with her hands, crying so deeply it seemed she would break in two. Gregory picked up the paper from the ground, read it again, and felt his chest tighten in a way he had never felt before. The guilt he already carried had just multiplied 1,000-fold. Sophia had written that. Their daughter had felt invisible, and they, too busy with their careers, their commitments, their ambitions, had not noticed. Gregory clenched his fists, feeling the rage at himself rise in his throat. He wanted to scream, to hit something, to go back in time and do everything differently. But time doesn't go back. And now all that was left was that letter, those painful words written by the hand of a child who just wanted to be seen, to be heard, to be truly loved. The girl stood there watching the two adults cry in front of her. She didn't quite understand what was happening, but she knew it was something very serious, very sad. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, pulling her back inside, giving the couple space to live their pain in peace. Marianne finally composed herself a little, wiped her face with her hands and looked at the girl who was still there at the entrance with those big, curious eyes. "What's your name?" Marianne asked, her voice still trembling. "Caroline," the girl answered softly. "Caroline," Marianne repeated, as if testing the name on her tongue. "How old are you?" 10, Caroline replied, shrugging. Marianne looked at her for a long moment, seeing something in that girl she couldn't explain. It wasn't Sophia, it never would be. But there was something there, something pure, something that made her feel a strange, unexpected connection. She looked at Gregory, who was also looking at Caroline, with an expression that mixed pain with something like hope. "Caroline, thank you so much for keeping this letter," Gregory said, his voice deep and tired. "You have no idea how much this means to us." Caroline nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing she had done something important. Caroline's mother appeared again, now with a friendlier, less suspicious expression. "I'm sorry about the situation," she said, wiping her hands on her dirty apron. "I'm Claire. Caroline found this necklace on the day of that horrible accident on the drive. She kept it because she thought it was pretty, and because the letter seemed important. I had no idea it was something this serious." Marianne shook her head, trying to process everything. "Do you two live here alone?" she asked. Claire nodded. "Yes. It's just me and her. Her father left when she was a baby. I work as a cleaner in some buildings over on Park Avenue, but the money barely covers the basics. Caroline helps me by collecting cans after school. It's tough, but we manage." Gregory and Marianne exchanged a look. Here was a mother who fought every day to provide the minimum for her daughter, while they, who had everything, had failed to give the most important thing: attention, presence, true love. Marianne took a deep breath, making a decision she didn't even know where it came from. "Claire, I'd like to do something for you. You saved something very precious to me. Let me give you my number. If you need anything at all, call me, okay?" Claire was surprised, but accepted the card Marianne took from her purse. "Thank you, Mom. We're not used to getting help, but I accept. Thank you so much." Caroline looked at Marianne, and for the first time, she gave a small, shy smile. Marianne felt her heart ache. She crouched in front of the girl, looked into her eyes, and said, her voice thick with emotion, "Thank you, Caroline. You don't know it, but you just gave us something we thought we had lost forever." Caroline didn't quite understand, but she felt it was important. She nodded, still smiling, and watched the couple leave, crossing the alley back to their car, carrying that letter as if it were the most valuable treasure in the world. The ride home was silent. Gregory and Marianne didn't exchange a word, but they didn't need to. Both were lost in painful thoughts, replaying every memory, every lost moment, every wasted opportunity. Sophia's letter had opened a wound they didn't even know existed. Or maybe they did, but had ignored it for too long. When they got home, Gregory went straight to his office. He took the letter, placed it in a glass frame, and hung it on the wall, right in front of the desk where he worked. From that day on, whenever he looked at those words, he would be reminded of everything he had lost. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to keep him from making the same mistakes again. Marianne went to Sophia's room and lay on the little girl's bed, hugging one of the stuffed animals, smelling the scent that was still there, clinging to the sheets. She cried until she fell asleep, and when she woke up hours later, it was already night. The house was silent, but it was no longer that terrifying silence from before. It was a different silence, the silence of someone who was beginning to process the pain, to accept the loss, to seek some kind of peace. The following days were strange. Marianne couldn't stop thinking about Caroline, about that girl who had found the necklace, who had kept the letter, who had returned something to them that seemed impossible to recover. She felt a strange need to see the girl again, to know how she was, to do something for her. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper. It was as if Caroline had become a link, a bridge between the past and the present, between pain and hope. A week later, Marianne called Claire. She invited them both to the mansion for afternoon tea. Claire was hesitant at first, but eventually accepted. The following Saturday, she and Caroline appeared at the gate of the house, dressed in the best clothes they had, but still looking completely out of place in that luxurious setting. Marianne greeted them with a genuine smile, something she hadn't done in months. Gregory was there too, in his wheelchair, more put together than usual, with his beard trimmed and a clean shirt. They led Claire and Caroline to the living room, where the cook had prepared a table full of snacks, cakes, juices and coffee. Caroline looked at everything with wide eyes, as if she had stepped into a movie. While Claire and Marianne talked in the living room, Caroline was invited by Gregory to see the house. He took her through the hallways, showing her the paintings, the sculptures, the indoor gardens. Caroline was amazed by everything, touching things carefully, as if afraid of breaking something. When they passed Sophia's room, Caroline stopped at the door, looking inside with curiosity. "This was our daughter's room," Gregory said, his voice low. Caroline entered slowly, looking at the stuffed animals, the books, the drawings on the wall. She stopped in front of a specific drawing, the one Sophia had made in the car on the day of the accident. The drawing of the family holding hands under the yellow sun. Marianne had taped it there after finding it in Sophia's backpack. "She was a very good artist," Caroline said, smiling. "She was," Gregory confirmed, feeling a lump in his throat. "She was full of life, full of dreams." Caroline was silent for a moment, looking at the drawing. Then she turned to Gregory and asked with the brutal honesty only children have, "Do you miss her a lot?" Gregory felt his eyes sting. He nodded slowly. "Every day, every second." Caroline nodded too, as if she understood. She hadn't lost anyone in the same way, but she knew pain in a different way. The pain of absence. The pain of never having had something that others had in abundance. When they returned to the living room, Claire and Marianne were talking animatedly. Claire was telling her about her job, about the difficulties of raising a daughter alone, about her dreams of giving Caroline a better life. Marianne listened attentively, and for the first time in months she felt connected to someone real. It wasn't the superficial chatter of social events, it was something genuine, something that made sense. Before they left, Marianne made a proposal. "Claire, I'd like you to come here more often. Caroline can use the pool, play in the garden. She can even stay in the guest room if you want. This house is so empty. It would be nice to have some life here again." Claire was surprised. "But, Mrs. Mason, I can't accept something like that. It would be too much." "It wouldn't," Gregory interrupted firmly. "It would be exactly what we need. And I think you two also deserve a little rest, a little comfort. Please accept." Claire looked at Caroline, whose eyes were shining with excitement, and finally agreed. "Okay, we'll come." Thank you. Thank you so much." And so, a new routine began to form. Caroline and Claire started visiting the mansion on weekends. Caroline played in the pool, ran through the garden, drew in the playroom. Claire talked with Marianne, helped in the kitchen, and slowly the two of them built an unexpected friendship, founded on shared pain and renewed hope. Gregory was changing, too. He started paying more attention to the things around him. He started talking more with Marianne, asking how she was, really listening to the answers. He still felt the pain of loss, of course, but now there was something more. There was a reason to try again. There was Caroline, who looked at him with those eyes full of life, who asked questions, who laughed, who reminded him that there were still good things in the world. But not all was well. While Gregory and Marianne were immersed in this new phase of rediscovery and healing, something dark was happening behind the scenes at the company. Richard Albright, the CFO, had been moving the pieces of his plan for months. He had taken advantage of Gregory's grief to infiltrate allies into key positions, tamper with contracts, and divert funds to phantom accounts. It was a multi-million-dollar scam, meticulously planned, and he was just steps away from gaining total control of Mason Construction. Richard was a calculating, cold, ambitious man. He had always envied Gregory, envied his success, his fortune, the respect he commanded in the market. And now, with his boss vulnerable, it was the perfect chance to take it all for himself. He had already convinced some board members that Gregory was no longer fit to lead the company. He had planted doubts, spread rumors, manipulated numbers. It was almost time. Very soon. And he would have succeeded, if not for an unlikely witness. Caroline had started frequenting the Mason Construction building, not because she was interested in business, but because her mother, Claire, had gotten a job as a cleaner in a neighboring building, and sometimes after school, Caroline would stop by to wait for her mother to finish her shift. She would sit in the lobby, drawing, reading, watching people come and go, and it was on one of those afternoons, while sitting in a corner, invisible as always, that she heard something that caught her attention. Two men were talking near the elevator, speaking softly but not softly enough. Caroline recognized one of them. It was the man who was always in Gregory's office when she visited, the one named Richard. He was talking about bank transfers, about offshore accounts, about how they needed to erase their tracks before anyone found out. Caroline didn't understand everything, but she understood enough to know that it wasn't right. She took out the old cell phone her mother had given her for emergencies and started recording. The men didn't notice. No one ever noticed Caroline. And this time, that was an advantage. Caroline arrived home that afternoon with her heart pounding. She had recorded almost 10 minutes of conversation between Richard and the other man, whose name she learned was Morris, one of the board directors. They talked about large sums, about forged signatures, about how they needed to speed up the process before Gregory started paying attention to the company again. They spoke as if they owned everything, as if no one could stop them. But Caroline had stopped them, or at least she had gotten the proof that something very wrong was happening. She showed the recording to her mother, who turned pale as she listened. Claire didn't know much about business, but she knew enough to recognize a crime. She held Caroline's shoulders, looking deep into her daughter's eyes. "You have to show this to Mr. Mason. This is very serious, Caroline. Very serious." Caroline nodded nervously. The following Saturday, when she and her mother visited the mansion, Caroline asked to speak with Gregory, in private. He took her to his office, closed the door, and asked with a curious smile, "What is it, kiddo? You have that look of someone with an important secret." Caroline took a deep breath, took out her phone, and played the recording. Gregory listened in silence, but the expression on his face changed with every second. The smile vanished, his brow furrowed, his eyes narrowed. When the recording finished, he stared at the phone for a long moment, as if trying to process what he had just heard. "Caroline, where did you get this?" he asked, his voice deep and controlled, but with a clear tension. "I was in the building waiting for my mum, and I heard them talking near the elevator. I thought it was weird, so I recorded it," Caroline explained, biting her lip, nervous. "Did I do something wrong?" Gregory shook his head, placing a hand on her shoulder. "No, Caroline, you did the right thing, the very right thing. You have no idea what you've just done. He took the phone, connected it to his computer, and made a copy of the recording. Then he called for Marianne, who was in the living room reading a book. She entered the office, saw Gregory's serious expression, and immediately knew something grave had happened. He played the recording for her, and Marianne was just as shocked as he was. "They're robbing the company," Marianne whispered, incredulous. "They're robbing you while you're grieving." Gregory clenched his fists, rage boiling inside him. "Richard was always my right-hand man. I trusted him with everything. Everything. And he did this." Marianne placed a hand on Gregory's shoulder, trying to calm him. "You need to act fast. If they're talking about erasing tracks, it means they're close to finishing the job. You need to gather evidence, talk to a lawyer, call a board meeting." Gregory nodded, already thinking about the next step. But before anything else, he looked at Caroline, who was standing there with that serious expression of someone who knew she had done something important. "Caroline, I don't know how to thank you. You saved my company. You saved everything." Caroline gave a small, shy smile. "I just did what I thought was right." "And you did," Gregory said, smiling back. "You have more courage than a lot of adults out there." In the following days, Gregory immersed himself in a quiet investigation. He hired a trusted lawyer, a specialist in corporate crime, and began reviewing contracts, bank statements, and internal emails. The more he dug, the more he discovered. Richard had created an elaborate network of fraud. Phantom accounts registered in tax havens, altered contracts with forged signatures, embezzlement of funds from public works, bribery of board members. It was a large-scale criminal operation, and worst of all, Richard was days away from transferring controlling shares of the company to his own name. Gregory felt a mix of anger and disappointment. He had trusted Richard. He had promoted him, given him opportunities, treated him like a friend. And all of it was repaid with betrayal. But now Gregory had proof. And with proof, he had power. He scheduled an emergency board meeting for the following Friday. He said it was about the future of the company, about important strategic decisions. Richard attended, confident, thinking he was finally going to get what he wanted. Maurice was there too, along with the other board members, all seated around the long meeting table, waiting to hear what Gregory had to say. Gregory entered the room pushing his own wheelchair, with Marianne by his side, and the lawyer right behind carrying a briefcase full of documents. He went to the head of the table, positioned his chair, and looked at each person present. The silence was tense. Everyone waited. "Good morning, everyone," Gregory began, his voice firm and controlled. "I know you're wondering why I've called this meeting. Some of you, in fact, may be thinking that I'm no longer fit to lead this company, that I'm weak, vulnerable, incapable of making decisions. And perhaps for a time you were right." Richard smiled discreetly, thinking he was about to hear a resignation. But the smile died when Gregory continued. "But what you don't know is that while I was grieving, some people here took advantage of my absence to try to steal everything I've built, to alter contracts, divert funds, and plan a multi-million-dollar takeover. And these people thought no one would find out. They thought they could do it all in the shadows, without leaving a trace." The room fell completely silent. Richard turned pale. Maurice swallowed hard. The other board members looked at each other, confused. Gregory signaled to the lawyer, who put a screen up on the wall and began projecting documents, altered contracts, bank statements, suspicious transfers, incriminating emails. It was all there, exposed for everyone to see. And then Caroline's recording began to play. The voices of Richard and Maurice filled the room, talking about embezzlement, about offshore accounts, about how they needed to erase their tracks. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Richard's face was red, his breathing rapid, his eyes wide. Maurice had his head down, his hands trembling. The other board members looked at the two of them with expressions of shock and disgust. "Richard, Maurice," Gregory said, his voice as sharp as a blade. "You're fired, effective immediately. And more than that, you will be held criminally responsible for everything you've done. Fraud, corruption, forgery, embezzlement of public funds. I've already handed all the evidence over to the FBI and the district attorney's office. You will pay for every cent you stole." Richard jumped up, slamming his hands on the table. "You can't do this. You were absent. The company was failing. I saved this company." "You robbed this company," Gregory corrected coldly. "And now you're going to pay. Security, please escort these two men out of the building. They no longer work here." Two security guards entered the room and took Richard and Maurice by the arms, dragging them out as they shouted, protested, and threatened to sue. But no one was listening. The board had seen the evidence. They had heard the recording. There was no possible defense. When the door closed, Gregory took a deep breath, feeling a huge weight lift from his shoulders. He looked at Marianne, whose eyes were shining with pride, and smiled. It was the first time in months he felt in control again, the first time he felt he still had the strength to fight. The other board members stood up one by one and shook Gregory's hand, congratulating him on his courage to confront the traitors, on his firmness in taking action. They knew the company had escaped a corporate tragedy, and they knew that Gregory was still the leader he had always been. When everyone had left, Gregory was alone in the room with Marianne and the lawyer. He looked at the screen, where one of the altered contracts was still displayed, and felt a deep gratitude for Caroline. That 10-year-old girl, invisible to everyone's eyes, had saved everything. "I need to do something for her," Gregory said, looking at Marianne. "Something big, something that will change her life." Marianne nodded, smiling. "I was thinking the same thing." That same weekend, Gregory and Marianne invited Claire and Caroline for a special lunch at the mansion. They had prepared a surprise. After lunch, Gregory asked Caroline and Claire to sit in the living room. He had something important to say. "Caroline," Gregory began, looking at them both seriously, "you've changed our lives. In a way we can never fully repay, but we want to try." He took an envelope from the table and handed it to Claire. Inside the envelope was a document. Claire opened it, read it, and her eyes filled with tears. It was the deed to a house, a real house, with 3 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, a full bathroom, and a backyard, located in a safe neighborhood with a good school nearby, and it was in Claire's name. "Mr. Mason, I can't accept this," Claire said, her voice trembling. "This is too much. This is way too much." "You can, and you will accept it," Marianne said, firm but gentle. "You deserve it. You deserve so much more than this." Caroline looked at her mother, saw the tears streaming down her face, and started to cry too. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew it was something very good. Something that would change everything. Gregory smiled, his own eyes welling up. "And there's more. Caroline, you're going to attend one of the best private schools in New York City. A full scholarship, materials, uniform, everything. And if you want to go to college in the future, we'll pay for that too." Caroline was speechless. She looked at Gregory, then at Marianne, then at her mother, and finally broke down in tears. Claire pulled her into a tight hug, and the two of them cried together, while Gregory and Marianne watched with smiles on their faces and hearts full of an emotion they hadn't felt in a long time. "Thank you," Caroline managed to say between sobs. "Thank you so much." "We're the ones who should be thanking you," Marianne said, kneeling in front of them and holding their hands. "You brought light back into this house. You gave us hope again." The following months were a time of transformation. Claire and Caroline moved into the new house, which was just a 20-minute drive from Gregory and Marianne's mansion. Caroline started at the private school, and for the first time in her life, she had access to new books, dedicated teachers, and classmates who treated her as an equal. She blossomed. Her grades soared, her confidence grew, and she discovered a love for math and science. Gregory and Marianne were changing too. They drastically reduced their workloads. Gregory delegated more responsibilities to trusted directors and began working from home most days. Marianne only accepted projects that truly interested her and started dedicating more time to self-care, to therapy, to processing the loss of Sophia in a healthy way. They started having dinner together every night, something simple that they hadn't done in years. They talked about their day, about plans for the future, about memories of Sophia that they could now share without completely breaking down. The pain was still there, of course. It always would be. But now it was accompanied by something more. By acceptance, by learning, by a will to live again. Caroline and Claire became part of their routine. They had dinner at the mansion at least twice a week. Caroline played in the pool, did her homework in the library, talked with Gregory about math and with Marianne about art. Claire helped in the kitchen, chatted with the cook, exchanged recipes, and laughed in a way she couldn't remember doing in years. It was a different kind of family. Not the family they had had before. But it was a family. And that was enough. Richard and Morris were arrested 3 months after the meeting. The FBI found all the offshore accounts, recovered a large portion of the embezzled money, and the two were sentenced to over 10 years in prison for corruption, fraud, and money laundering. The news was in all the papers, and Gregory was publicly praised for exposing the criminals and saving his company. But Gregory knew the real credit didn't belong to him. It belonged to Caroline. That invisible girl whom no one noticed, whom no one saw, had been the only one to realize what was happening, and she had had the courage to act. On a quiet Saturday evening, they were all gathered in the mansion's living room. Gregory, Marianne, Claire, and Caroline. They had just finished a delicious pot roast the cook had prepared, and now they were sitting around, talking, laughing, sharing stories. It was a simple evening, but it was perfect. Caroline was sitting on the floor, drawing in a new sketchbook Marianne had given her. She held up the drawing and showed it to everyone. It was a portrait of the four of them holding hands under a giant yellow sun, just like the drawing Sophia had made, but different, because now there were 4 people, 2 families, united by pain, courage, and love. Marianne looked at the drawing and felt her eyes sting. She took the paper, looked at it fondly, and smiled. "It's beautiful, Caroline, so beautiful. Can I hang it in my room?" Caroline asked, excited. "Of course you can," Marianne replied, "but let me take a picture first." She took out her phone, photographed the drawing, and then hugged Caroline. Gregory watched from a distance, a smile on his face. Claire's eyes were full of tears, but they were good tears, tears of gratitude. Caroline looked at Gregory and said, with that brutal honesty only children have, "Mr. Gregory, are you still sad sometimes?" Gregory took a deep breath, thinking about his answer. "Yes, Caroline, I still get sad. Every day I miss Sophia. But you know what's changed? Now I feel other things too. I feel gratitude. I feel hope. I feel that there are still good things in this world, and a lot of that is because of you." Caroline smiled, embarrassed. "I didn't do anything special." "Yes, you did," Marianne said, stroking her hair. "You did everything." 6 months had passed since that dinner. 6 months of change, of growth, of healing. Life in the Upper East Side mansion had regained its color. The hallways that once echoed, with silence now heard laughter, conversation, music. The garden that no one used anymore now had footprints on the grass, a forgotten ball near the pool, chalk drawings on the pavement. The house was alive again. Not in the same way as before, but in a new, unexpected and equally valuable way. Gregory had returned to work, but in a completely different manner. He no longer spent 12 hours a day at the office. He no longer took calls during dinner. He no longer scheduled meetings on Saturdays. He had learned in the most painful way possible that success without presence is an empty victory, that money without love is just paper, that power without human connection is loneliness disguised as achievement. He began to delegate more. He hired a new team of trusted directors, people he had thoroughly vetted before giving them positions of responsibility. The company continued to grow, profits continued to rise, but now Gregory knew that wasn't everything. It wasn't even half of everything. What truly mattered was right there, in the dining room, in the conversations before bed, in the hugs he now gave without rushing, without thinking about the next appointment. Marianne had also transformed. She had returned to working on architectural projects, but with a different focus. Now she only accepted works with social impact, public schools, community centers, low-income housing. She used her talent to make a difference in the lives of people who truly needed it, and she discovered that this fulfilled her in a way no international award, no luxury project, no recognition from the elite ever had. She also started going to therapy for real. Not the superficial therapy from before where she just vented about work stress. Now it was deep therapy, where she revisited her childhood, processed traumas, understood behavioral patterns. And most importantly, she learned to forgive herself. She learned that to be human is to make mistakes. That to be a mother is to do the best you can, even if it's not perfect. That Sophia loved her, despite all her faults. And that honoring her memory didn't mean torturing herself forever, but living better, loving more, being present. Caroline was unrecognizable. The thin girl who collected cans in the streets was now a brilliant student, full of energy and dreams. She had just won first place in the school's math Olympiad, and Gregory had framed the certificate and hung it in his office next to Sophia's photo. He said the two girls were his greatest victories, one whom he had lost but would never forget, the other whom he had found and would never let go. Caroline had made friends at her new school, girls who invited her to birthday parties, to sleepovers, to study groups. She was no longer invisible. She was seen. She was heard. She was loved. And that had changed everything about her. Her posture, the way she spoke, the sparkle in her eyes. She had discovered herself, and she was just getting started. Claire had blossomed too. She had left her cleaning job and now worked as an administrative assistant at an accounting firm run by a friend of Gregory's. It was a decent job, with a contract, benefits, and regular hours. She came home in the late afternoon and had time to cook, to talk with her daughter, to watch TV without being exhausted. She had gained a few pounds, her face was fuller, healthier, and she laughed. She laughed a lot. Something she hadn't done in years. The friendship between Claire and Marianne had deepened in a surprising way. They were from completely different worlds, but they had connected on a level that transcended social class, education, or money. They shared stories of motherhood, exchanged recipes, went to the hair salon together, watched movies on weekends. Marianne had found a genuine friend in Claire, something she had never had before. All her previous friendships had been superficial, based on interests, appearances, convenience. But with Claire, it was different. It was real. On a Thursday afternoon, Marianne invited Claire for coffee on the mansion's veranda. They sat in the comfortable armchairs, with a tray full of breads, cakes, and fruits between them, and talked for hours. At one point, Claire grew serious, looked at Marianne, and said, "You know, Marianne, I never really told you what my life was like before I met you all." Marianne paid close attention, setting her coffee cup down. "Tell me, I want to know." Claire took a deep breath. "I grew up on the streets. My mother abandoned me when I was 7. I was raised in a shelter, went through foster families who treated me badly, learned to survive on my own. When I got pregnant with Caroline, I was 18 and living in a tarp shack. Her father showed up, promised to help, but disappeared in the second month of my pregnancy. I had Caroline alone at a public health clinic with no one holding my hand, and when I looked at her little face for the first time, I swore I would give her a better life, that she wouldn't go through what I went through." Tears streamed down Marianne's face. "And you did it. You raised an incredible girl, Claire, full of kindness, courage, and love. You did it all on your own, against all odds. You are one of the strongest women I know." Claire shook her head, also crying. "I tried, but it wasn't easy. There were nights I didn't sleep because I had nothing to give her for dinner. There were days I cried in secret in the bathroom at work, thinking about giving up. But I didn't. And when I met you, it was as if God had looked down at me and said, 'You deserve a rest. You deserve to be happy.'" Marianne held Claire's hand tightly. "You deserve everything, Claire. All the good this world has to offer. And I will be here by your side always." They hugged, crying together. Two women who had come from opposite universes but who now walked side by side, united by shared pain and renewed hope. Gregory and Caroline had also developed a special relationship. He had become a sort of mentor to her. He taught her math, explained business concepts in a simple way, showed her how to solve complex problems with logic. Caroline absorbed everything like a sponge. She was brilliant, and Gregory saw immense potential in her. He had already started planning her future, a full scholarship to the best university in the country, a study abroad program, an internship at the company when she was old enough. He wanted her to have every opportunity he had and more. But beyond the intellectual mentorship, there was something deeper. Caroline reminded him of Sophia, but not in a painful way. It was different. She reminded him that children need to be seen, heard, valued, and he was determined never again to make the mistake of being an absent father. Even though Caroline wasn't his biological daughter, he loved her as if she were, and she knew it, and she returned that love. On a Saturday morning, Gregory took Caroline to visit one of Mason Construction's sites. It was a housing complex being built in a peripheral area of New York with apartments for low-income families. Caroline was amazed by everything: the giant cranes, the workers, the blueprints spread across the engineer's table. Gregory explained each stage of the construction, showed her how the structure worked, how the material strength was calculated, how the spaces were planned. Caroline asked intelligent questions, took notes in a notebook, and at the end said, "One day I want to do this too. I want to build houses for people, real houses where they can be happy." Gregory felt his chest swell with pride. "You will, Caroline. You'll achieve anything you want, because you have something that many people don't. You have heart." Caroline smiled, and the two of them stood there looking at the construction site, imagining the future, dreaming of possibilities. It was a simple moment, but a perfect one. A moment Gregory had never had with Sophia. And now he was having it, and he made sure to cherish every second. Life went on. Gregory returned to physical therapy with more dedication. He knew he would never walk again, but that didn't stop him from living fully. He had adapted to the wheelchair. He had modified the house for full accessibility. He had bought an adapted car. He had started going out again, traveling, doing things he had given up after the accident. He was no longer that broken man who only felt anger and guilt. He was a man who had learned to live with his pain, but without letting it define him. Marianne was physically different too. She had lost weight in a healthy way, had started doing yoga again, taking care of her skin, her hair. Not because she cared about appearances, but because taking care of herself was a form of self-love. And she was learning to love herself again, to accept her flaws, to forgive her mistakes, to move forward. On a Friday night, Gregory and Marianne were alone in the living room after Caroline and Claire had left. They were sitting on the sofa, side by side, in silence. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who know each other deeply. Gregory broke the silence first. "Mary, I was thinking we should take a trip, just the two of us. It's been so long since we've done that." Marianne smiled. "Where do you want to go?" "I don't know. Somewhere quiet. Maybe a beach or the mountains. Somewhere we can just be, without thinking about work, without thinking about commitments. Just be." Marianne looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she saw the man she had fallen in love with 20 years ago. The man who made plans, who dreamed, who made her laugh. He was still there. He had just been lost for a while. But now, he was back. "I'd love that," she said, taking his hand. "Let's do it, let's travel, let's live." And they lived. 3 weeks later, Gregory and Marianne were at a simple inn on the Jersey shore, on a nearly deserted beach. They spent their days walking on the sand, he in the beach-adapted wheelchair they had rented, she by his side. They talked about everything and nothing. They remembered Sophia without breaking down. They laughed at silly memories. They made plans for the future. They were reconnecting, and it was good, very good. One evening, sitting on the inn's porch, looking at the moonlit sea, Gregory said, "Do you think Sophia is proud of us?" Marianne was silent for a moment, thinking about the answer. Then she nodded slowly. "I think so. I think she sees us trying again, trying to be better, trying to honor her memory in a way that makes sense." Gregory smiled, his eyes welling up. "I think so too. And I think she would have liked Caroline. I think they would have been friends." "They definitely would have," Marianne agreed. "Sophia would have loved teaching Caroline how to draw. She would have loved having a big sister." They fell silent again, listening to the sound of the waves, feeling the cool night breeze. And in that moment, they felt a peace they hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't the absence of pain, it was living with it. It was the acceptance that life goes on even after tragedies, and that it's possible to find beauty again, even after everything has fallen apart. When they returned to New York, they found a surprise waiting. Caroline and Claire had organized a welcome home dinner at their new house. They had cooked, decorated the table, and invited the cook and housekeeper from the mansion. It was a simple party, but full of love. Gregory and Marianne arrived with flowers, wine, and gifts, and they spent the evening laughing, talking, eating, and toasting. It was a family, not the family they had planned, but the family that life had given them. And it was enough. It was more than enough. At one point during the evening, Caroline stood up and asked for everyone's attention. She was nervous but determined. She had something to say. "I wanted to thank you," she began, looking at Gregory and Marianne. "Before I met you, I thought I was invisible, that no one saw me, that no one cared. But you saw me. You heard me. You gave me a chance. And you changed my life. You changed my mum's life too. And I will never forget that. Never." She paused, took a deep breath, and continued. "And I also wanted to say something I learned from you. Money doesn't ask how your day was. Money doesn't listen when you cry. But love sees, love listens, love stays. And I know that you love me. I know my mom loves you. And I love you too, very much." The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Marianne was crying. Gregory's eyes were misty. Claire held her daughter in a tight embrace, and everyone there, in that small room, in that simple house, felt something that money couldn't buy. They felt belonging. They felt family. They felt love. Gregory struggled to his feet from the chair, supporting himself on its arms, and Caroline rushed to help him. He stood leaning on her and said, "Caroline, you saved more than my company. You saved me. You reminded me that there are still good things in this world, that it's still worth fighting, that it's still worth loving, and I will be eternally grateful for that." He hugged her tightly, and Caroline buried her face in his chest, crying with happiness. Marianne joined the hug, and then Claire did too. The four of them stood there, embraced, forming a circle of love, of healing, of hope. And there, in that moment, the man who had lost his daughter and the use of his legs discovered that his heart was still capable of walking towards redemption, that life still had good surprises in store, that pain, no matter how deep, is not the end. It is just a part of the journey, and that it is possible, yes, to find light again, even after everything has gone dark. Their story wasn't perfect. They still had difficult days. They still missed Sophia. They still carried scars that would never completely fade. But now they had something they didn't have before. They had each other. They had presence. They had love. They had family. And that, in the end, was everything. Gregory sat back down in his chair, his face wet with tears but a smile on his lips. Marianne sat beside him, holding his hand. Caroline and Claire sat on the other side of the table, also holding hands, and everyone there knew that this was a moment they would cherish forever, a moment of unity, of healing, of new beginnings. Life had taken a lot from them, but it had also given a lot. It had taken Sophia, but it had brought Caroline. It had taken Gregory's mobility, but it had taught him to value what truly mattered. It had brought Marianne to rock bottom, but it had given her the chance to rise stronger. It had shown Claire that she was not alone, and it had shown Caroline that she was seen, loved, and important. And as they ate, talked, and laughed that night, the stars shone in the sky outside, and somewhere Sophia was shining too. Proud of her parents who had finally learned the most important lesson of all, that love isn't measured in achievements, in money, or in success. Love is measured in presence, in hugs, in glances, in time, in being there truly, in body and soul. And they were. Finally, they were. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Gregory, Marianne, Caroline, and Claire has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of pain, redemption, and love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what resonated with you the most. Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, which speak of loss, overcoming adversity, and the strength to start over. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, with more emotion and more stories that will make you reflect on what truly matters in life. See you soon.